Good morning, everyone. We are working on getting the chat enabled. So give us a minute or two, and then we'll get started about 11:02, 11:03 PST. Okay, perfect. Well, it looks like chat is working for everyone. I am unable to use chat, but if y'all can put in where you're from, we'd love to see where everyone is coming from today. I am from Seattle, Washington. I'm calling in from Newark, chapter 60. Looks like we have more people from Seattle. Hey, Anchorage, Rochester, Indianapolis. Winchester, Orange County, Oceanside, California. Is it Mommy? Ohio? Dallas. Well, it looks like we have people from all over the country. So thanks for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and get our intro going. And if you're just joining us, feel free to drop in the chat where you're from. My name is Mercedes Gamore. I am the National DEI Chair for NAWIC. I'm really excited to bring this amazing webinar to you. This year, we have decided to do something a little bit different with our committee, and we have a little bit more focused webinars and attention on allyship and the LGBTQ community. And this is hosted by our LGBTQ plus resource group. They have brought this year a couple of different workshops. We had kind of an intro workshop back in January, and then we had an intro to allyship workshop last month as well. But we're really excited and lucky to have Julie Kratz here from Next Pivot Point. She has been a speaker and is an author. And so we're excited to have her and just her expertise in sharing kind of how you can show up for other people and how you can be that ally. So we appreciate you all for being here, and I'm going to hand the reins over to Julie.
Thanks, Mercedes. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us where you're from, where you're joining from. It's always fun to see diversity of geography, which is one function of diversity that we don't always think about. So love to see folks there. Excited to kind of kick off this hour with you. It's going to be super interactive, so bring your candid questions, share your stories, examples. We'll be using an anonymous polling software. So it's super easy to use. I promise not to spam you, but do get engaged that way, and you'll get more out of the session as well. So just by way of introduction, I've spent 10 years as a manager of my business, Next Pivot Point, which exists to facilitate inclusive experiences so that everyone feels seen, heard, and belongs, not just in the workplace, but hopefully in all spaces. And I specifically research allyship and inclusive leadership. And I teach at the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University. But my real why for this work is my kiddos. I know the world needs to be more inclusive than it has been. I entered the workplace in the early 2000s in construction, by the way. Worked at Caterpillar and was often the only woman in meetings, was often not asked about certain types of assignments, etc. And ultimately, after 12 years, that's why I left. I didn't feel a sense of belonging. And so I want the world to be more inclusive, not just for my kids, but all future generation kiddos deserve to have a sense of belonging in the workplace and in all spaces. So, what to expect for folks that have maybe read all the DEI books, the inclusion books, this could feel like a little too little. For folks that are newer to the journey, it can feel like a lot. So I just try to strike somewhere in between. 80% of people are usually in between those extremes. So my goal will be to meet you where you're at. This isn't about changing beliefs or values. It's very difficult to actually do. Instead, it's more just about respecting differences and understanding that this is a journey, not a destination. We will not be solving world problems today, but we will be leaving hopefully with just one thing, one shift, one idea, one strategy that you can take action on right away. That's always my goal. Um, and how we'll go through that, we'll kind of chunk out the conversation into three parts. So the first part will be around ambiguity and why ambiguity is so hard for our brain. We dislike gray area. We want right, wrong, good, bad, this, that, not goodish, rightish, this-ish. That's painful. It's a paradox. It's difficult for our brains to think that way. And so how do we create space for others? You have to separate intentions from impact. Someone could have a lovely intention and have a horrible impact. Both of those things can happen. Someone could be a good person and do something absolutely terrible. But most people do get out of bed in the morning trying to be a good person. It might not feel like that sometimes, but usually people have a why for what they're doing, even if it is ill-informed or not advisable. And so it's really separating those two things that can help us. And then we can call people in. So Loretta J. Ross, I love her work. She has a book about calling in, a podcast about calling in, a TED Talk about calling in. And she says call people in versus out because we need to assume positive intent. And in order for them to want to talk back, right, to be called in, they have to feel welcome. They have to feel heard as well. And so there's some big differences between calling people out with shame and blame, you're a bad person, versus calling people in. Hey, I understand you to be a good person. I'm confused about something. It's a subtle difference, but a kind difference, and one that's just way more effective. Well, thanks so much. The workbook is in the chat too, so you can follow along that way. I always encourage people, if someone from your chapter or your organization could benefit from this content, use the workbook, use the recording, have a conversation about it. And then we'll wrap up at the top of the hour with commitment. So one specific thing you can take action on that you can control. I think in this wild world, sometimes we just think we're completely powerless, but I've found actually we have a lot more power than we think. And it starts with understanding our role as an ally, how we can be helpful to people that are different from us. How do we create space? And when I talk about space making, it's really these tools that create space for dialogue, that create space for conversation, that create space for dissension, even. Most diverse and inclusive teams have a lot of challenging ideas. That's what psychological safety actually really is. It's not kumbaya land. Let's all be happy. It's more, let's be real with each other. And so I'm sharing at the top of the screen the directions to join Poll Everywhere. It's free, anonymous, and I'm not going to spam you or track you, okay? This is how we'll do the activities. So we have about 5 activities today that I'd love to get your full participation in. So when you think about space making, creating space for people that are different from you, how would you rate your level of knowledge on the topic right now? 1, super beginner, 10 more advanced, or maybe somewhere in between. And I do ask this question for a specific purpose. 1, I want to meet you where you're at on your learning journey so I can speed up or slow down. It looks like I'm speeding up today, which is good because there's a lot of content on this. And then 2, we'll measure this at the end. So our goal is always to improve knowledge, even if we have a more advanced group. What else could we learn? So go ahead and all right, I see 5 so far. So we will use this a bunch. Again, it's free, anonymous, and not spammy. So join if you can. And thank you for the workbook. I saw someone put 1 in the chat. Yeah. And if just the concept of creating space is new for you, it could be, I always take for granted these terms that I study as like, oh, everyone knows what it means to create space. And I've shared that term with people in, regular social circles. Are like, what do you mean by that? So there is something to unpack here. If you understand this, there is a more nuanced topic. Good, good. I see 10 people voted, so very cool. 12. Yeah, we got a nice jump there. Very cool. Very cool. So a lot of folks in the advanced camp, but definitely some beginners as well. So we have a lot of diversity and knowledge of this group, which is always good. Awesome. So another activity kind of to break the ice, reflect on times when you felt different than the rest of the group. Maybe it's personally, professionally, past, present. How did it feel? So that feeling of feeling different, kind of channel that feeling when you're like, "Ooh, I'm not like everybody else here." What words come to mind? Isolating, yeah. We are wired to be social beings, to be in connection with each other. So isolation is actually quite deadly. Surgeon General did a study a few years ago where he said it's similar to smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, being isolated. Is that harmful to our health? Scary, lonely, awkward, uncomfortable, targeted. Yeah, we feel shame, awkward. It's like I think about the middle school walking into a social setting where you don't feel like you belong. There's like nothing worse than that visceral feeling of like this is not where I'm supposed to be. Intimidated, embarrassed, lonely, uncomfortable. Yeah, an outsider. You can feel like the other, like we're not supposed to be there. It's uncomfortable. Absolutely. Not belonging. Yeah, the opposite of belonging. Imposter syndrome, 100%. Intimidated. Yes. So what happens when we feel different than the rest of the group? We get a cue, right, that we're different. It could be parts of our identity, our race, or gender, or ethnicity. It could be something like our beliefs, right? They're all wearing t-shirts that support a different belief than me. Um, it could be a sense of danger too. So oftentimes one of my biggest privileges is my white skin. And when I enter spaces that are predominantly people of color, I have that visceral reaction of like, am I supposed to be here? I'm different. Well, imagine being a person of color all the time. That's constantly happening. So there's this weathering that happens of being the other over time. Yeah, left out, hyper vigilant. Yeah, our alarm system's going off in our brain, signaling, are we safe or not? Am I supposed to be here or not? Could I be hunted? Back in our primal days, we really spent time in groups that were like us, that were small, and we knew we were in group. And so it's a visceral reaction that we have when we feel different from the group, right? Could create fear. Excellent. So kind of channel that mindset and think about the reason to create space for others. If we know how bad those feelings feel. Why would we want other people to feel those feelings? This is why creating space is so important, especially if you want to be a better ally or you want to be helpful towards people that are different than you. Step one is really to embrace the ambiguity, right? It's not the good or the bad, it's the good-ish in between. Diversity is really a paradox. So we're not going to get it right 100% of the time. If we would, we would solve all these problems already. This is a centuries long game, getting focusing more on inclusion. And it's kind of this tethering of it could be good and bad. It could be messy. It could be ambiguous. And so rather than using polarizing terms, extreme terms, kind of embracing the in between. So the word paradox, if you're not familiar with this is actually really important. So Brene Brown, she's a shame researcher. She actually studied paradox in leadership. And there is a high correlation of effective leadership and embracing paradox. It's actually very difficult to train our brain to do this, but the good news is, just like anything else, empathy, vulnerability, all these skills, we can absolutely put in the repetitions and start to train our brain to think this way. So, paradox is really this kind of absurd, self contradictory statement or proposition that, when investigated or explained, may prove to be well founded and true. Well, how could they be a good person if they said that? How could that be true if this is also true, right? It's like those two things don't go together. But sometimes they can go together. And that's the surprising aha when we find that they, in fact, are not completely disconnected, that there is a both and, a yes and. The reason this is so hard in our brains, though, is because we actually have this cognitive dissonance when our brain kind of sorts things into categories. We're big pattern recognizers, right or wrong, good or bad, right? So we have to kind of limit that categorical thinking. We have to pump the brakes on the pattern recognition and instead replace it with there could be two truths. We can hold space for two conflicting truths at the same time, but our brain has to do a lot more work to hold space for those two truths. Okay. That could be right, and this could also be wrong. This could be a good person and also do something bad, right? It's kind of like, oh, mental Olympics. It hurts a little bit. It makes our brain hurt to hold space for those two things. But that's what diversity and inclusion is all about. People need to think outside of these categories. When you think about even categories we've constructed, like gender and race, to be binary, there's a lot of in between there, right? There's a gender non-binary, they, them pronouns, and the gender fluidity piece. And then there's racially, there's rarely a purely black or white person. There's brown. There are different skin tones, even within all of the different races. So there's a lot more gray area. Now, does anyone know or studied improv? One of the very basic lessons in improv, as someone who has not studied improv but knows it well enough to know, it's the key phrase is yes and. So in improv comedy, when somebody kind of, you know, says a joke and they're waiting for the next person to pick it up and they have no idea what was going to be said, the easiest thing to do to kind of modify in the moment and hold space for this paradox is to say yes and, right? So you build off of it. You don't want to destroy it because that wouldn't be funny to judge what somebody said. The yes and makes it funny, so it makes it interesting. So it could look something like this with creating space. Yes, she's a good person and she makes mistakes. They are different, and we also have a lot in common. See how that kind of like, if you really think about that, it starts to hurt a little bit in your head because these two truths can share the same space, but we like to simplify our thinking into those categories. And by opening up to two truths, we can be more inclusive as allies. So this is important because identity is a big part of the diversity conversation. So what dimensions would you add? These are only 6 different dimensions of diversity. There's so many more, right? And we often, especially in the last few years, have really likened it to race and gender because we think we can see those things, but we can't always see those things. And again, there's a non-binary component of those things too. There's a fluidity, a spectrum to those things. Same with abilities, sexual orientation, or LGBTQ plus background, socioeconomic class, age. There's so many more. And if you're following along in the workbook, this is in your workbook an activity to add other dimensions. What other dimensions of diversity might you add? What else is missing on that list? I think about neurodiversity, if you're not familiar with that term, cognitive differences. So my 4-year-old has autism, and I've been on a journey to try to be a better ally for neurodiversity. Religion, yeah, absolutely. No one, is anyone going to be brave and put politics? All sorts of differences. So it's not just what we think we can see. There's way more to the diversity conversation beyond optics. What else? And if you want, if you just joined, the directions are up here to join the poll too. Thanks for sharing the workbook again in the chat. Yeah, ageism. Absolutely. All the isms. Ageism is actually the greatest source of bias. Most people are biased against themselves as they age, even. We're all going to get older eventually, but we definitely have a preference for youth over older. Upbringing, yeah, how you grew up, where you grew up, who your caregivers were. None of these things we have control over. All of our identities, really, we don't have a heck of a lot of control over any of them. Location, rural versus urban. We're murky middle. I'm in the suburbs. I'm in the gray area. I'm in the paradox. Education, expectant mothers. Yes, 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 yes. Definitely a dimension of diversity. Location. Yeah, that's really interesting. And we're seeing that a lot right now, that location really does impact our thinking. Who we spend time with, absolutely. Size, especially in instruction. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, body size. Birth order. Ooh, that's an interesting one. Personality, right? And I don't want to dilute diversity because, of course, race and gender are huge parts of diversity, but there is more to the conversation. And when we broaden the definition of diversity, we bring more potential allies into the conversation as well. And we really need our allies, especially those with power right now. Language, veteran status. Yeah, I have a company I'm working with right now to start a veterans employee resource group. What a great opportunity, especially at a time when veterans have really been hit hard with a lot of the government cutbacks. Stuff, y'all. Thanks so much for sharing. Great responses. So why do we not create space? If it's like so good to create space and embrace the paradox and the yes and make conversations interesting, we're afraid of being irrelevant. We're afraid we're going to get into a conversation where we don't know the answers, we don't know what to say, and we stumble and we bumble and we make a mistake. Did a bunch of research for my new book, and that is exactly where people with power, with people in dominant group identities tend to focus on. I'm not meant to be here. I'm the different one. You don't want to hear from me. I'm just going to say the wrong thing, so I'll stay out of it. Well, how the heck are we going to get out of it if we don't have people with power engaged in the conversation? And this costs us all a lot. So when we have a non-inclusive employee experience, it's costly on turnover, it's costly on revenue, it impacts the customer experience, it impacts innovation, profitability, revenues, decision making. I could give you so many statistics on the cost of exclusion, but we typically tend to focus on what is it going to cost us to do inclusion. The question we should be asking is what's the cost of not doing it? And inclusion is super ambiguous, so there's no perfect ally. It really is holding that space for a both and embracing that murky area, that gray area. Intersectionality is a great example of that. If you've heard of that term, that's two different dimensions of diversity or more impact coming together. So something like race and gender or disability and LGBTQ could be a smattering of so many different dimensions that impact intersectionality. And the paradox mindset is really learned. So I really love Dolly Chug's work. So she has a book that this is her most recent book, A More Just Future, but it really is about social change and how to get young people involved. And if there's anything about Gen Z, they are coming into the workplace, one, with a lot more power because of labor shortages, a lot more clout and ability to mobility because of baby boomers' retirement rates. And they just happen to grow up in the most diverse and inclusive time in our country. So they're asking questions like, well, what's the diversity like on the leadership team? How inclusive is this organization? What employee resource groups do you have? They have an unwavering expectation for diversity and inclusion because that's how they grew up. And students in my college class, that's what they tell me. I don't think they'll say, I don't think they understand that this is the way we are. We're not going to change. It's the cake's baked, you know? And so thinking about diversity and inclusion as a competitive advantage for talent, for future consumers, and just asking questions like, in what ways is this perspective true? And what ways is false? So embracing nuance. You know, what information would you need to rethink that? Let's research this together. That's my favorite with my daughter when I don't know something. Let's research this together and see what data we can find out about the issue. Or even just offering some vulnerability. I used to think that too. Or what did you mean when you said that? This is how we can kind of untether, right? Call people in without shame or blame. And we're kind of at the halfway point now, so I'd love to just open it up for questions. What questions do y'all have so far on space making? And then we're going to go through a whole bunch of tools on how to create space. So for now, kind of kept it at a mindset level because changing our mindset about embracing paradox and creating space is really step one. If we don't change our mindset, there's no way we're going to do it. If we get stubborn and judgy and all the things because it feels really good to be self-righteous and to be right. But it doesn't usually have the impact we were hoping to create. We are not changing hearts and minds with a judgment, a shame, call out conversation. So what can you do to kind of build more paradox and embrace more paradox? What questions do you have? And I will pause for the full minute because I almost always find the most curious, insightful questions come at the minute mark. And if I don't know the answer, I will research it and I will probably write about it. So this is always really good intel for me to see where people's minds and hearts are. What questions do you have so far? And I'll open this up at the end as well. So if you're on the poll link, you can type in the chat too. Oh, nice. Came across a really great book about neuro-inclusive space design. Can I put that in the chat? Yeah, I found it really awesome. Yeah. Oh, yeah, of course. Of course, Diane, if you have a great resource, share that with us. Yeah, neuro-inclusive space design is a great example of like literally creating physical spaces. We're kind of talking about, mental spaces, but things like sensory needs, natural light over fluorescent lights, noise cancellation, the ability to block out sensitive noises. My daughter has autism, and when she hears loud noises, I mean, it's just instantly like this because her hearing is much more sensitive than ours is. Um, and the degree to which we can have focused stages and spaces. Designing Neuro-Inclusive Workplaces, written by Kay Sargent from HOK, which was an architect firm. That's so cool. Yeah, I love that. That's awesome. Other questions? So space making, and y'all being in construction, I know that's obviously on your mind. Physical spaces, how to make them inclusive is really important. I would say having the mindset around inclusive space design. And a lot of this that we're talking about, creating space for mental conversations, can lead to that space being, truly inclusive when it's physically created to support that too. So they go hand in hand. It's a paradox. How do you manage conflict between folks on opposite ends of the spectrum? Yeah, isn't that the big question? I just did a presentation on bridging for another group right before this, and really is the concept of we have to go first. So when we're trying to bridge with somebody, we have two different points of view, two different sides, and rather than focus on how different we are and othering and breaking and sending people off into further polarization, I put the bridge up, and then hopefully they put the bridge back up. And it just starts with aiming your curiosity at the person, not at the issue, not judging the issue, but just be like, if I know them to be a good person, how could they believe this, right? Really getting curious about the question. And that can help reach people. I mean, it's not going to solve polarization, but it can help us realize we have a lot more common good, a lot more common ground in humanity. What talking points can you offer to help convince designers of the importance of spaces for others, like a calm room, sensory issues, lighting? Do you have sources for those? Yeah, I have a whole course on inclusive space design, actually. It's more for my nonprofit Little Allies for schools and things, but the principles absolutely apply to adults because they're 1 in 5 people. So, two things: 1 in 5 people experience neurodiversity or neurodivergent. Because 20% of the population, that's a lot of people. So that's a business case. And then the employment numbers for people, so like just autism alone is like 85% unemployment rate. Okay. So we're intentionally, really at this point, leaving out a huge swath of our workforce, a huge group of the community. So 1 in 5, I can share that stat with you. I've written about it extensively in my Forbes column as well. I have a great neuro inclusion space article that I can point to as well. So thanks for those reminders. Yeah, 20%. Do you want this space to work for 20% of people? Let me just sit with that. Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, I'll share some resources as well. So I think about paradox and embracing paradox. One paradox could be I have different beliefs and I'm a good person, right? Is that hard for you? I know it's hard for me some days, depending on what's happened in the news. Another example of paradox, I'm not a racist and I think there are equal opportunities for all people. So it's kind of this denial of racism, but I'm not a racist. Right? Have you heard that before? Or even Dr. Seuss had racist books that inspires children. I remember I posted something about Dr. Seuss way back when, and someone really, called me out online and, shamed and blamed me and said it was Dr. Seuss was terrible and I should never post anything about his books. Come to find out, there were 6 books that were pulled off bookshelves that were deeply problematic. But there could be other books that are also good too. So it's really about holding people accountable for their behavior, but not judging them as a category, as a person. It's kind of like I hate this metaphor. I detest this metaphor, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But that's essentially what we're talking about here. Just because one idea is bad doesn't mean all ideas are bad. So, what principles from Paradox could you apply to conversations around diversity and inclusion? Is there any principles that are, kind of practically? I know this is kind of a heady topic. We'll get into some more tactical strategies and how-tos, but just want to take a break here. Are there principles around, thinking about yes and thinking about good-ish people, thinking about finding those bridges and finding those points of connection? How can you have that mindset more? And if you've worked, again, Brene Brown found in her research, there's a high correlation between effective leadership and a paradoxical mindset, meaning we can kind of navigate these murky spaces where it's like, well, they're not necessarily good, they're not necessarily bad. It's like somewhere in between. Right? And remember, a lot of our dimensions of diversity are fluid and paradoxical too. So there's seldom a one way or the other way. There's lots of kind of nuance and ambiguity in between. And when we get good at embracing that, we can be more innovative. We can make better decisions. We can think outside the box, literally. Other thoughts? You can have someone struggling with a work environment be an out-of-box thinker that solves problems in a way that others wouldn't think of. Yeah. This is a great benefit of neurodiversity because there are cognitive differences where brains work differently. Like, what an opportunity to problem solve, to think about things we in a different way we hadn't thought about before. This whole untapped part of our workforce, and we're forecast to have significant labor shortages. Like, what a miss. Good communication helps the person you're speaking with understand you in a way that works for them. Yeah, I love that. Yep. Yeah. And what works for you doesn't always work for them, right? I used to think everyone's like me or should be like me. It's like, oh, maybe I don't have it all figured out myself, right? As a DEI leader, recognizing I also have blind spots or bias. Yeah. And I might offer a correction to blind spots. I've learned a more inclusive way to say that is just my weak spots. How do you build the capacity to apply this paradox mindset to issues specifically around diversity, inclusion, or the lack thereof? Yeah, it is important to build capacity. So it does hurt our brains, that cognitive dissonance, right? That category sorting machine resists paradox. So I kind of want to make sure, just like decision fatigue is real, paradox fatigue is real. What realistically can you make capacity for a both and conversation? And how frequently can you do that, right? Really being mindful of like, that's a once a week kind of activity that I can do, but really flexing the muscle. I do it all the time, not all the time now, but any chance I get, I pursue those paradox mindsets. Um, but it took a lot of repetition, a lot of practice over, several years to not have to do as much mentally. It's just like lifting weights. The first few times it really is, painful, but then once you've lifted them quite a few times, you're pretty used to it. You're pretty strong. And the same goes for that mindset. Establish boundaries of balancing freedom of expression. Yes, I love that. Good stuff, y'all. I love these responses. Keep them coming. So, the second part of this is about intention versus impact. And so, the status quo is, in fact, the enemy of diversity. Diversity literally means to do things differently. We can't keep doing things the same way and expect different outcomes. That's definition of insanity. So, what's the difference between intention and impact? Again, like Dolly Chugg says, most people are goodish people and have positive intentions with their behavior, but people are often not educated about the impact of their behavior because we're not privy to it. We don't know how it impacts others or the team or the client. We may not even be there when that impact is felt. It takes an ally to help frame feedback to increase awareness on the negative impact of their behavior. So you get to keep your good intentions and your apology and your accountability, but you can also be mindful that it had a negative impact. So both of those things can be paradoxically true. And what we end up doing, though, as we do psychological distancing, we make assumptions the closer events and people are to. So if people are like me, right? Oh, she's like me. She's a good person, right? If people are here now in my proximity, we're going to be a little bit more lenient. If it's in the current times, there's a thing called presentism where we judge people on present day standards in the past. If somebody said, gay is a pejorative in the 1990s, that was very commonplace. Now we know that that's wrong and there's social correctness around that, rightfully so. And is it rooted in reality? So we distance ourselves from things that are not now like me, that are different. At the very time that's what we learn the most is from people that are different from us. We're kind of resisting this benefit. So having that inclusive mindset, because we're all allies in training, is assuming positive intent that most people are good people, but they're not aware of their behavior. And that's all we have to do is just stay curious just a little longer in the conversation, aim our curiosity at the person, not necessarily their ideas if we don't agree with them, but the person. How can we be more curious about them, their why, their needs, their understanding? And then we separate the intentions from the impact. So the intention could be to be helpful, to be an ally, to hold people accountable, but it could have had a negative impact on the team, a person, or the organization. But helping people, you might be thinking, like, why do I have to do this work? Why don't they do the work? Well, helping people is really a deeply primal human need. On the other side of a conversation like that is usually significantly enhanced trust, cooperation, collaboration, innovation, again, better decisions, etc. So this is how we build strong, healthy teams, by calling people in to be better, especially if we care about them, right? We may have seen something, have a vantage point that they don't have. They may not realize the impact at all. Probably completely unaware is a safe assumption. And feedback can be a gift. So one of my favorite leadership feedback frameworks is called the SBI model. essentially it starts the situation, who, what, where, when, why. We were at this meeting at Tuesday and someone said this. It gets to the behavior, the specific actions, words that were said in the situation. So in this meeting on Tuesday, someone said this, the impact, the impact to the client, the team, the person, the business was this. So I was in this meeting on Tuesday and Matt interrupted Jill, and the impact was that Jill didn't share any other ideas the rest of the meeting, right? We missed out. So what do you think we could do differently next time? Just did an SBI, right? And so what you want to do is kind of remind people about the situation, because especially if there's been time or space, they might have forgotten. Use their exact words or their exact behaviors and use I statements. I observed you saying this, right? So you is going to elicit defensiveness. Don't ask why. Ask, what do you think? How can we resolve this? What's an idea to make this better? Emphasizing that we need to change the impact so that the behavior lands. Okay, so it's about acknowledging the impact is not what we want, therefore the behavior has to change. If you're interested in kind of like starting the conversation, just know that people think that we don't talk about these issues enough. It might feel like all the pushback and withdrawal that people want us to be quiet, but quite the opposite is true. 90% of people want to be allies and want diversity and inclusion in the workplace. It's just a matter of how do we start the conversation. So I love call-in phrases like, I care about you and I want to share something with you. I want to hear your perspective on this. What if nothing changes? I want your help. I want to talk to you about something that's difficult. I noticed when you said or did this, the perception, that's a great word, is perception was this. And I know that's not the perception you wanted to create. Because they're just acknowledging that disconnect between their behavior and the impact that it created. So how could you frame feedback to someone using the intention versus impact model, or maybe the SBI model? Two of my very favorite inclusion tools. What helps me when I witness absurd behavior or non-inclusive behavior, it helps me is just like, oh, they don't know yet. And so I just tell myself, oh, they don't know yet. They're unaware, right? And I will say the majority of the time when I say something to somebody, they're like, oh, I had no idea. Thanks for letting me know. If you say it in a friendly, caring way, and it doesn't have to be overly optimistic or diluted, but you're bringing people into the conversation rather than out. And if someone's doing something that's harmful, don't they deserve to know about it? Why would you want to keep that a secret? So I remind myself too, you're being selfish by not telling them, right? If I want them to do better, I need to do better and establish more comfort with calling in. But as a reformed people pleaser, sometimes I resist that. So how can you use this? And maybe you've seen the SBI model before as a common leadership framework for feedback, but I personally love it because it's super easy to remember in the moment. And then again, intentions, you can have good intentions, but you can also have a negative impact. You can have bad intentions and a good impact. That's kind of a really paradoxical thing to say, but it's true. Sometimes the impact is not at all what we were hoping to create. We don't have that much control over the world. What feedback do you have on those tools? How could you use those? I voice how the comment is affecting me in hopes that the person is more careful about continuing their behavior towards women. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Like, this is affecting me. I know you care about me and this is affecting me. I think that's very, very clever. Make it personal. Mhm. And Loretta J. Ross's, we're going to talk about calling in here in the last chunk, as she says, she loves to say, I know you to be a good person, and here's how I'm experiencing this. I think that's just so powerful. Make sure not to blame, use it as a learning opportunity. That's what you really want. You want someone to learn, grow, and do better. And once people know better, they can do better, as Maya Angelou says. But if they don't know, they can't do. And people are not mind readers. I run across non-inclusive language, like a little microaggression-y things happen all the time. And sometimes I'm like, oh, not today. I don't want to deal with this. Not, but then I'm like, not on my watch. I feel like I have to speak up and say something, especially doing the kind of work that I do. But I have to tell you, sometimes I don't have the courage. Sometimes I don't have the strength. Sometimes I don't have the mental capacity, and that's okay too. We don't have to be perfect allies, but if we can get better at being more of an upstander versus a bystander most of the time, It's really what we're looking for, not perfection, just progress over perfection. Yeah, good stuff here. So let's wrap up with calling people in. I mentioned before we learn more from people that are different from us, right? And so by insulating our networks, it's called affinity bias, where we surround ourselves with people like us, that think like us, that have similar beliefs and values to us. Yeah, feels better. It feels probably easier, but that's not how we learn and grow. We learn by surrounding ourselves by people that are different from us, have different vantage points. And people can have different values, and we can keep our own values and respect our own values and respect their values and also let them keep their values. We don't have, it's not about changing beliefs or values. But people aren't as good of allies as they think they are. This research from McKinsey and Company, they do great diversity and inclusion research. Most people consider themselves to be allies for women of color at work. But when you think from an intersectional lens like that, from a gender and race perspective, allyship actions aren't kind of matching up. So great intentions, not great impact, right? The advocacy is very low, confronting discrimination is low, giving credit for their own ideas is low, educating themselves about the experiences of women of color is low. And then the one that really gets me is the mentorship and sponsorship is painfully low. So we're under mentoring and under sponsoring people with these intersectional identities at a time when we really need a workforce that's embracing diversity and inclusion. By 2030, the workforce will be majority people of color and women. And so that creates some interesting opportunities for this work, another business case for inclusion. And we will make mistakes. So mark my words, when you are practicing allyship, you absolutely will do things that you didn't intend to do, that you didn't want the impact of. And the best way that I've learned is just to offer a complete apology. No ifs, ands, buts, no excuses, no painfully me making it all about me. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm a terrible person, but that's not helpful. Just own it. I'm sorry. I messed up. It won't happen again. It really can be that simple if it's genuine and clear. Create group accountability for when we make a mistake. We will agree to call each other in. Establish best practices. What does a good call in look like? What's the kind of phrasing? What fits with our culture? I have all sorts of different ways clients do. They have code words sometimes. They have an agreement up front. They have circle back conversations where we don't talk about it, publicly, but we circle back later. But just establishing those clear lines of communication so that future conflict, that we have ground rules, that we know how to lead this, because conflict will happen, stumbles and bumbles will happen. It's how we handle those when it happens that separates real allies. And allies listen more than they speak. One of my favorite phrases in leadership: we don't know what we don't know yet, which is key, yet. And this is why people say silly things like, I don't see it. Is this real? Diversity is way better than it used to be. I haven't heard of anything, so it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen to me, doesn't mean it doesn't happen to other people. That's a form of gaslighting where we make people feel like in disbelief of the story that they're sharing with us. So when someone shares their story, the best thing to do is honor it, to believe them. But instead, we can be really apathetic instead of almost like, oh no, I have a different lived experience, right? Well, I remember doing a session in the South with a white man and a woman of color, and they were comparing kind of lived experience notes. And I remember, some of the stereotypes didn't quite match up with their identities. And so they talked about socioeconomics, which was a very unique thing for them. They talked about power structures. They talked about different levels of privilege. And at the end of the day, they realized that our different lived experiences are very different than stereotypical norms for our identities. But oftentimes we assume everyone else is having the same experience we are having in the workplace. And so I have a white male partner and I will share stories with him about things that actually happen. And he will say, oh no, there's no way someone would do that to somebody. I'm like, no, they wouldn't do it to you, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen to other people. Right. And so it's this paradox. You have to open it up as I haven't experienced it. It doesn't mean it can't happen for other people. There's another apathy reason. It's called the Marley hypothesis, and this is the ignorance of past diversity issues leads to the denial of the problem in the present. So if we're ignorant of past things, and our history books aren't so good at telling stories, some of the things we didn't know, obviously in the summer of 2020, anti-racism work just exploded, and rightfully so, but people didn't know about redlining. They didn't realize that, we're still dealing with a lot of the consequences of redlining. that houses were undervalued in historically marginalized communities, that they were not given favorable loan rates. The GI Bill was not offered to Black soldiers that returned from World War II. Jim Crow laws largely replaced a successful Reconstruction in the post-Civil War South. History books were written by Confederates. Like these are just all things that like people don't know. And why would you know? But if we're ignorant of those past issues, the reason it's so important to know them is so we don't make the same mistakes in the future, right? We can only get good at embracing our problematic, if we embrace our problematic past, that's how we get better. By ignoring it, we're never going to solve a problem by ignoring it. We have to understand what the problem is and what it's rooted in and what the historical context is. Fragility, you might have heard of the book White Fragility, but just fragility in general around diversity. I think we want to think again that the world is good, we solve these problems, we work forward. I was raised by a single mother that was a very big feminist. And I remember when I entered the workforce in 2000, she said, Julie, the feminists took care of everything. You're good now. You're going to have an equal chance as men. So imagine my chagrin when I entered a Caterpillar construction industry and I was the only woman on the leadership development team and constantly the only woman in most meeting settings, only woman supervisor, leader of union staff, just lots of challenges that I wasn't prepared for because I thought the world was inclusive. I thought these problems had been solved, and so I had to experience them to understand. No, discrimination is very much alive and well, and it doesn't just hurt me, but it hurt my allies. I remember the men that I worked with. There would be situations where we would travel together, and the expectation is that you would share a hotel room. Well, they didn't want me sharing a hotel room with other men, thankfully. And so they wouldn't include me. When I was pregnant, it was assumed that I did not want to be promoted. And I never said that. I never said anything about travel arrangements or flexibility needs or anything that would suggest that. So we still kind of have this discomfort about hard issues. And so what we usually do is avoid them and throw on some apathy. Like, oh no, that's not happening. It's just not helpful ignoring a problem that's really quite persistent. I'd love to say the world's much better, 20 some years later. I still hear stories like the ones I experienced quite often. The last apathetic reason is like this myth of meritocracy. So these are the unhelpful beliefs that we all have an equal chance to succeed, pull ourselves up by those bootstraps, and hard work pays off. So here's the thing with power and privilege. It's not that people didn't earn it. It's not that they didn't have hard experiences. Being human is hard. But, I didn't have bootstraps to pull myself up by. I did have steel-toed boots at one point, and because they were men's boots, because they did not bother to make women's steel-toed boots, that I could pull them up by bootstraps. But even then, thinking about that metaphor, individuals cannot outwork systems. So we need to think about the systemic constraints that are holding people back so that individuals don't have to self-will and advocate for themselves to get out of these unfair situations. And then the last ones, we surround ourselves by people like us. So one pro tip for diversity is diversify who you spend time with. Pull up on your phone, think about who you text with, who's on your calendar, who do you email with or communicate with. Are they like you? Well, you're not alone. Most people like themselves. We feel more comfortable with our mini-me's. This is why men are over-mentored, over-sponsored in the workplace because senior leadership is largely men and they feel more comfortable with people like them or younger versions of themselves. We all do it. A lot of us don't have racially diverse friend groups. A lot of us don't have, we think we don't even know a transgender person, where chances are we have been in exposure with someone in the trans community. It's also problematic because so much has been done historically to scare us about transgender people, from over-indexing in horror films to creating this dangerous kind of persona, the stereotype. And so we fear what we don't understand yet. And if we haven't had exposure to it, and we surround ourselves with people like us, it's kind of feeding that further polarization. But practicing allyship means practicing curiosity. It's the gap between what you want to know and what you do know. The only way to learn something new is to stay curious and to mind that gap. And it's not easy staying curious. We have hard wiring in our brains. After years and years on the planet, we've recognized patterns, we've stored those experiences, and we make a lot of assumptions about them based on our past. It's for our survival. but it's not super helpful when we're in a learning mindset, when we want to grow and expand and be innovative and we want to be relevant in a diverse workforce. We have to stay curious just a little longer. And that means spending time with people different from us, diversifying the networks, diversifying the types of people you spend time with, and educating yourself first. So before, we want to put the burden of our education on other people, ask, if you truly don't understand. Here's some curious questions I just love. This can be sometimes what I'll do in our training programs, especially if I'm working with a leadership team, is I'll give them assignments. I'll say, find somebody in your life that's very different from you and have a curious conversation. And here's some ways that you can start the conversation. Tell me about your experiences growing up, right? Maybe you drill into challenges, dreams, role models, share some of yours. What challenges have you experienced because of your identity? Right? And, if you're talking to someone with intersectional identities, that could be a lot. And why do you think we're still talking about these issues in 2025 now? How do you feel like about what's happening in the world? That could also be a long-winded one. What conversations are you having with others about this? What opportunities and recommendations do you have? So ask first, be curious, understand the other perspective. And all of those questions are in your workbook. So feel free to do an informational interview with someone you care about. I would say start with somebody that you have a high level of trust with already in psychological safety, because some of those questions can go sideways if you're just, surprising somebody and you don't have that trust already built. And always Google what you don't understand and don't assume. So one of the mistakes I make is like, oh, so I'm doing a lot of research on autism with my daughter. I don't have autism, I'm neurotypical. And so I'll say, well, autistic people do this. Like, okay, not everybody's a monolith. Um, Autism means her brain works differently, which means all autistic brains work differently. So you have to watch your assumptions and pretending to know things that you don't really know, or using broader assumptions and general stereotypes. But I will say things like, yeah, she has some digestive issues. That is common with the autistic community. That's a more inclusive way to honor there are differences within the community. What questions? What questions do you like? If you're trying to be curious, call people in, not out. What questions might you ask? I really like what makes you say that or what makes you think that when someone's like, behaving in an opportunistic and perhaps non-inclusive way. Just be curious and that you genuinely want to know the answer to the question. Oh, what accommodations can I offer that make this space for you? One subtle suggestion here. What does support look like for you? Because you don't even know if accommodations are necessary unless they've communicated that. I love that question. It's my favorite allyship question. What does support look like for you? Gold. What else? What other questions? And that's important when you think about physical spaces. I know many of you are working in. 50% of accommodations cost nothing. So people always go to, it's going to be costly. It's, special treatment. Like the curb cut effect, when we cut curbs into sidewalks for disabilities for folks in wheelchairs, that made it better for people like me that are bike riders, stroller pushers, people with knee problems, mobility issues. What works for some generally works better for all. What other questions? One more. How would you handle the situation, or what ideas would you have that would be good at solution? I love those. I love what and how questions. Y'all did a great job with what and how questions. You picked up on that cue. What and how questions are going to be way more curious. They can't be answered in a simple one-word answer, or yes or no. Do, could, should questions usually end up in a simple response or a non-curious response. So you're going to get more curiosity with more curious questions. So I had two questions for you before we wrap up, and I'm happy to take any additional questions in the closing minutes. But how would you rate your level of knowledge on the topic of creating space? Say 10, super advanced, one beginner, or maybe somewhere in between. So this is the question I asked you at the beginning, but now having spent some time together talking about inclusive space. Cool. Definitely see some higher votes, so that's fun. I will keep it open for a good 20 seconds. I'd love to hear from as many folks as possible. And again, it's anonymous. We're measuring this so that we can kind of see if we had a positive impact from the session. Keep it open another few seconds. So last chance to vote. Wow, we had a considerable movement up. That's so cool. Oh, still some folks in the beginner camp, which is okay, be honest. Love this. Yeah, nice surge there in the 7 to 9 range. That's so cool. Thank you so much for voting. And the last page of your workbook is an allyship accountability exercise. So I'd encourage you to set a goal. One thing you can do as a result of the time we spent together. Just jot it down. I'm going to ask more curious questions. I'm going to practice paradox. I'm going to use yes and whatever it is. Map out some talents, like why would this be something that's good for you? What resources might you need? And then what timeline can we set for a goal in the next month, the next 90 days? And who might you engage as a partner, an accomplice, as an ally? And then the last question I have for you is just pick one thing that you learned today, just one thing that you could take action on right away, and feel free to share with the group. Keep the poll open. Mercedes, I see you there to wrap us up. And feel free to, if there's a question I didn't get to, a burning thought that y'all have, additional resources like the book that was shared in the chat, feel free to share there. I'm going to build with pride, Stephen, and I'm going to have a great conversation today. I love that. So one of the things I'm encountering, Pride Month has been painfully quiet this month. So weird. But I have a few clients that have asked me things like, "Oh, how do I address this if someone's like, I don't believe in pride, or I don't, it's against my religious beliefs." I usually just say like, "Oh, I'm so curious about that. What makes you say that?" Or if someone says like, "I just can't, deal with this issue," and it's usually these like really nuanced issues like transgender sports or bathrooms. It's like, wow, it sounds really important to you. What experience have you had with this? And almost always when I ask that question, I try to ask in a very open-minded, genuine way because I am curious. They're like, "Oh, I just heard it's really bad." Like, "Oh, that's interesting because I've been using the women's restroom and I haven't experienced that." It's just sharing my experience, and their experience could be their experience. My experience can be my experience. Both could be valid and paradoxically different. There's an ongoing issue on my team where the paradox mindset could be really helpful in having genuine conversations. Yeah, I know. If we have a problem person on the team or a problem, we can get like, that's all bad. Everything associated with that is bad. Yeah, baby in the bathwater. I got to think of a better metaphor for that because I don't think that's the most inclusive one, but it also makes sense. People know what I mean. Oh, thank you for sharing my books. I tend to automatically react when people make ableist or racist comments instead of listening and trying to see where they come from. I'll try to apply and pause and think method. Yeah, pause, a breath, ground yourself if you can, getting some time outside, venting to someone is my personal strategy. Can you believe this one said? And that way I'm not biting their head off and further, showing them that like, see, I had this conversation with this person that like self-justifies their behavior. So I really try not to encourage more bad behavior. Stay in touch. So I have a newsletter, and I write in the Forbes to a Career column. My website has tons of free resources. You can even download a free allyship training on the website. So just scan the QR code, and then you can get hooked up there and stay in touch. And the last thing I'd say, Mercedes, I'll kick it over to you, is we have International Allyship Day. It's August 8th, and we are celebrating in New York City, but we also have virtual watch parties. So if you thought this content was interesting, we're going to have whole 4 hours of really cool programming with bunches of inclusion leaders all over the country, even from Germany. So it should be really fun, and I'd love to spend time with you. And the QR code website can get you there too. Thanks, Mercedes, for having me. What a fun group.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was amazing. For those of you who have attended a webinar with me before, previously, you'll receive the recording and the workbook and any kind of pertinent links here in the next week, week and a half. So if you don't see that, feel free to reach out to DEI@nawic.org. but we will get that over to you as soon as we can. A couple of NAWIC announcements. First off, the DEI and PD&E committees want to thank you for attending today. I think this was really great. And we're just really excited to continue the momentum forward. If you are attending annual conference, please take a look at NAWIC's website. They have built in a lot of professional development and a lot of DEI themes into the schedule this year for annual conference. So we really hope to see you there. And then I want to make a call out for two upcoming things. First, at annual conference, if you want to attend our Brave Talk, that is being hosted as a breakout session on Friday, and that is at 2:30 p.m. It's on the schedule. If you've never participated in a Brave Talk before, Brave Talks stand for Be Real, Authentic, Vulnerable, and Empowered. It's an opportunity to share successes, challenges, struggles, the good and the bad, because it's really great to get in a room with women who potentially have had similar experiences and can provide some insight or some feedback. So we want to have you join us there. Additionally, please take a look at NAWIC's website for upcoming webinars. We are always posting on there. There's an upcoming webinar with the legislative committee, the new legislative committee. That's women in construction, kind of shaping public policy and things like that. So if that's interesting to you, this will be their first like kind of big webinar. That's on July 28th, but that's on the event page on NAWIC. And then finally, a call to have you join us for our last committee session of the year before annual. We'll be hosting July 21st. That's also on the events page on NAWIC, and you can get the sign up link there. But thank you, Julie, for all of the amazing information, wow, and kind of a reframe on how we see allyship and how we can move into really important conversations. So thanks so much.
Thanks, y'all.